The incident we'll talk about in today's story began on a strange and silent morning, June 18, 1815, just before the first light touched the wet fields of Waterloo, where the world held its breath as two of history's most powerful armies prepared for a battle that would decide the fate of Europe. And in that foggy dawn, where the grass still held the blood of the previous night's fallen, there stood among the shadows a young soldier whose name has been lost to official records, a man who wore no medals, carried no famous title, and yet changed the course of history in a way few dared to imagine. For while all eyes that day were on Napoleon Bonaparte, the feared and brilliant general who had returned from exile and threatened once again to rule all of Europe, this unknown soldier had a different mission, one that no one around him understood, because while most fought for glory, for nation, or survival, he fought for something else, a whisper from his past, a face he had once seen crying in a burning village, a memory that never let him sleep. And as the cannon fire began and the sky turned to smoke, he moved not with his regiment but alone, weaving between the chaos like a ghost, silent, focused, untouched by fear, until at a moment when fate seemed to pause, when Napoleon separated briefly from his guards and mounted high upon his horse to scan the field, the soldier took his shot, one single shot from behind a shattered stone wall, aimed not with hatred but with calm certainty. And as the bullet flew and the emperor flinched, time seemed to freeze for a heartbeat. And though Napoleon did not fall that instant, the wound was real, hidden, deep, and enough to weaken him in the final hours of battle. And from that moment on, the French forces began to falter. The lines broke, and by nightfall, the dreams of empire had crumbled into mud and blood. And yet, while generals wrote their reports and history turned its gaze toward politics, the one man who made the shot that shifted destiny was already gone, vanished into the thick white fog that rolled over the field just after midday, a fog so heavy and strange that even seasoned soldiers said it felt like a wall of silence descending from the heavens. And though many searched, commanders, spies, even secret agents from both sides, no trace of him was found, not his name, not his body, not even his musket. And over the years, rumors grew like wild vines, some saying he was a time traveler sent to stop Napoleon from ruling the world, others claiming he was an angel or ghost of a man whose family was killed by the French years earlier. And in quiet taverns across Belgium and France, old men would still swear they once met him, a tall, quiet man with stormy eyes and a strange sadness, who spoke many languages and always disappeared before dawn. And yet no one could ever prove he existed, except for one thing, the journal of a British field surgeon named Dr. Alistair Finch, who on his deathbed in 1861 confessed that during the Battle of Waterloo, he had treated a soldier in the woods near Mont Saint-Jean, a man with a strange accent, a bleeding shoulder, and eyes that seemed to hold centuries of pain. And when the doctor asked his name, the man only smiled and said, "Names are for the remembered. I choose to be forgotten," and left before sunrise, leaving behind a bloodied cloth with a symbol no army used, a broken crown over a rising sun, drawn by hand. And when Finch tried to report it, his papers vanished, and he was warned never to speak of it again. And though many dismissed his account as the dreams of a dying man, others noticed that in paintings of Napoleon after Waterloo, the emperor always sat slightly slouched, holding his left side as if in pain. And private letters written by Napoleon himself mentioned a wound that no blade caused, a pain that worsened each year until his death in exile on St. Helena. And even on his last night alive, Napoleon was heard mumbling about the soldier in the fog, a man who looked into his eyes and showed him something colder than war, silence, and guilt and justice without a name. And now, more than 2 centuries later, the mystery remains. Who was he? Where did he go? And why did he fire not to kill, but to change history just enough to stop a tyrant's dream from fully rising. And some believe he still walks the earth in another name, in another face, keeping his distance from glory, forever watching, forever. Hidden, the man who shot Napoleon and vanished before anyone could thank him or curse him, leaving behind only a scar in history and a story that refuses to die. And yet the story refused to die not because of any book or official record, but because of the whispers that passed from generation to generation. The kind of story that people tell in hushed voices by firesides or in letters that never make it to libraries. And though the fog that swallowed the soldier also swallowed his name, those who saw him, or thought they did, remembered every detail, the way he walked like he was carrying a lifetime of silence, the way he looked at Napoleon not with hatred, but something even colder, like disappointment, like he expected more from the man who was supposed to change the world but instead filled it with ash and graves. And years after Waterloo, long after the smoke had cleared and the flags had been lowered, strange reports kept surfacing. A figure seen walking the cliffs near St. Helena on the night Napoleon died. A man with the same broken crown symbol carved into a walking stick seen in Venice in 1824. A journal in Prague discovered behind a crumbling wall in 1870 with entries describing the battle in perfect detail from the point of view of a shooter, signed only with the letter And while governments and historians dismissed these as legends or forgeries, there were others who weren't so quick to laugh: secret researchers, retired generals, even members of secret societies that had roots going back centuries, who believed that the soldier was part of something far older than Napoleon's wars, something that began long before Waterloo and continued long after. A silent order that moved like shadows between empires, correcting history not with armies but with a single action at the right moment. And though no one could say for certain who the man was, one name kept appearing: Matthew Del Mare, a French orphan raised by a priest who once served in the Templar archives, who disappeared from records in 1808 but reappeared in whispered stories of a man who could speak fluent Latin, Arabic, and Russian, who moved from Spain to the Balkans to the Arctic Circle without a passport, who wore a ring with no crest but a tiny engraved 17 inside, and who spoke often of cutting roots before the tree rots, and some believed. This Matthew was trained from childhood not to serve one nation, but to protect all of them from the madness of single rulers. And if this was true, if this soldier had been planted near Napoleon not by chance but by design, then the shot at Waterloo was not revenge but correction, not rage but a message, and what followed his disappearance was even more mysterious. Because in the years after the battle, small details began to surface. Letters stolen from Napoleon's exiled palace that mentioned dreams of a tall man in fog. Soldiers in the Prussian army who remembered seeing a figure walking through a battlefield untouched by bullets, always moving forward as if following a path no one else could see. And in a private journal of Marshal Ney, found decades later in a sealed chest in Berlin, there was an entry describing a brief meeting with a man in a green coat who said only one sentence before vanishing: "The empire ends when its reflection is correct." And Ney, though not a superstitious man, wrote that he felt cold for days afterward and never forgot the man's eyes, calm, steady, like they had seen centuries. And even now, historians argue about whether any of this is real, whether it's possible that one unknown figure could have altered the fate of Europe with a single bullet and then disappeared forever. But in old monasteries and forgotten archives, there are still documents marked classified eyes only that reference Project Fog and Subject MD. And in a dusty museum in southern France, there is a musket on display with no official origin, a weapon with unusual craftsmanship. And under the glass there is a note, unsigned, that reads, "Not all heroes wear uniforms, some wear silence." And perhaps that's what makes this story so powerful. Not just that one man might have stopped an emperor with a single shot, but that he chose never to claim it, never to use it for fame or glory, and instead walked back into the mist from which he came. And if you ever find yourself on the old fields of Waterloo at dawn, when the fog rolls in and the world turns gray, you might hear a soft sound, not a gunshot, not a scream, just footsteps fading into the earth. And you'll know that somewhere, long ago, history was changed not by generals or kings, but by a silent soldier with eyes full of memory who came not to destroy, but to remind the world that even the strongest empires can be cracked by a single man who refuses to be seen. Seen, and perhaps that is why his story continued to grow not through official documents, but through the memories of people who had no reason to lie. Farmers, travelers, monks, even poets, all of whom claimed to have crossed paths with a man who never gave his name but whose presence felt like the cold edge of a forgotten truth. And in one account from a shepherd boy in Tuscany in 1832, he described a tall man sitting alone by a dried river, staring into the horizon and humming a melody no one else knew, and when asked where he came from, the man simply pointed to the clouds and said, "From where silence has weight," and then vanished into the fog that drifted through the valley. And in another tale recorded in a dusty Russian folktale book from 1847, there is mention of a ghost soldier who walked through battlefields without fear, touching the foreheads of the wounded before they died and whispering a word in a forgotten tongue. And while these stories might sound like legend, there were also physical traces. Strange carvings found on abandoned walls in old towns, identical. Symbols in faraway places, old letters tucked into church floors that mentioned a man who knew kings but bowed to none. And in 1859, a traveler in Morocco found a cave filled with charcoal drawings, detailed sketches of European battlefields from angles no local could have known, all signed with a single broken crown, and historians brushed it off as coincidence, as imagination. But those who paid attention began to realize that these sightings were not random. They followed a path, almost like he was tracing the wounds of war across the earth, walking from one memory to the next, leaving behind signs not for fame, but for someone to understand one day. And perhaps he knew that someone like Elise, or people like you and me, would one day sit and wonder, what if one man really did make that choice? Not because he hated Napoleon, but because he believed no single man should ever hold that much power over life and death. And what's even stranger is that in 1888, a painter in Belgium named Armand Lenoir claimed in his private diary that a man knocked on his studio door one rainy night asking to paint in silence. And though Armand never saw the man's face clearly, he allowed it, and by morning, the canvas left behind showed an image of Napoleon on horseback, not strong, not heroic, but tired, his eyes lost, with a faint shadow of a man standing behind him in the fog holding a rifle lowered to the ground. And the artist never showed the painting to anyone until his death, when it was discovered under his bed with a note that read, "Painted by the one who changed history." And even more chilling was the fact that in the background of the painting, scribbled faintly into the mist, were the words, "I did not come to kill a man, I came to kill a future." And from that moment, scholars who once called the story a myth began to look again, to question the official versions, to read between the lines of old diaries, secret files, redacted military reports, and everywhere they looked, they found one strange pattern: silence where there should have been noise. Names scratched out, events unrecorded, documents misplaced, as if someone had carefully erased every path to the truth, but left just enough behind to spark a question. And in one of the most mysterious discoveries of the 20th century, a sealed iron box was found beneath a collapsed chapel in rural Switzerland in 1926, inside which were letters written in 4 languages, all unsigned but all carrying the same theme, warning of leaders who rise too fast, of ambition unbalanced. by wisdom of history repeating itself if no one stands in its way. And in one letter dated 1815 but never mailed, the writer says, "He was brilliant, he was fearless. But he stopped listening to people and started listening only to his own shadow, and that is when I knew he must be reminded that all men bleed." And again, the letter ended not with a name, but with the symbol, a crown split in half, and below it, the sun rising from the middle. And now, more than 200 years after the Battle of Waterloo, with technology that can scan paper fibers and match inks, some experts believe these letters, the musket, and the stories might all point to a single figure, someone who never wanted to be a hero, someone who vanished before the world could ask him why, and while no one knows where he went. There's one last account that gives pause. In 1941, during the height of World War II, a British intelligence officer named Caroline Mercer wrote in her notebook that she encountered an old man in a train station in Geneva who handed her a sealed envelope and said, "When the tyrants return, remind the world that even silence has a sword." And the envelope contained only one thing, a faded photograph of the field of Waterloo, with a faint outline of a figure in the mist, and in the corner, drawn by hand, was that same broken crown. And Caroline kept it until her death, after which it was passed to a museum in London, where it remains locked away with the label, "Unverified artifact, subject of folklore." But those who believe know better, because truth does not need permission to exist. It only needs someone to listen. And perhaps even now, as wars rage and new empires rise, the soldier walks still, waiting in the fog, carrying not a rifle but a memory, a reminder that when history forgets its heart, one man without name or nation can still return and set it beating again, not to claim victory or recognition, but to gently steer history back toward balance, because his story was never about the glory of battle or the fall of empires. It was about one man carrying the burden of memory, moving through time like a shadow that refuses to settle, always watching, always waiting, always remembering. And though his face has faded from the world's view, his presence lingers in places most people don't look, in the cracked corners of old libraries, in ink-stained letters written during wartime that mention him only as the one who knows, in melodies passed from soldier to soldier that carry the rhythm of his footsteps through mud and gunpowder, and most of all, in the silences between the pages of history, the long pauses where names are missing, files are lost, or dates don't quite match. That's where he hides, not to escape, but to protect something deeper than nations or kings. The fragile hope that someone, somewhere, still remembers what it feels like to choose peace over power, and one such memory surfaced in 1963, when an old woman named Clara Vandenberg, a Belgian nurse who had served in both world wars, gave a private interview to a university researcher where she recounted a night in 1940 during the German invasion of Belgium, when she was hiding wounded children in a barn outside Brussels, and a tall, quiet man in a brown coat appeared at the door, carrying a child who had been left behind. His hands gentle, his eyes filled with a sorrow she never forgot. And when she asked his name, he said only, "I've had many names, but none worth repeating." And when she blinked, he was gone, vanished into the fog rolling off the fields, and she swore she never heard his footsteps leave. And though this story was dismissed by the academic community as a trauma-induced vision, Clara insisted until her death that the man she saw was real, and that something in his eyes made her believe he had seen not just one war, but all of them. And this wasn't the only report. In 1971, a mountain climber in the Alps found a cave with carvings that matched the same broken crown symbol seen across centuries, alongside drawings of faces, Napoleon, Hitler, unknown men, all with their eyes closed as if sleeping or refusing to see, and the climber claimed he felt a strange peace inside the cave, like he was being watched by someone who didn't wish to harm him, but simply to be remembered. And this theme kept returning: memory, silence. The feeling that history itself was being guided by invisible hands not to control, but to correct. And in the year 1982, a retired German intelligence officer named Ulrich Schott released his private memoirs, in which he described a secret division during World War II tasked not with gathering enemy intel, but with locating a figure known only as Der Nebelgeist, the fog spirit, described in old Nazi records as a threat to every authoritarian regime in Europe, a man believed to appear only at pivotal moments of collapse, never to fight, never to rally crowds, but to deliver one act that unravels entire plans. And though Ulrich himself never found the man, he claimed to have seen footage from a destroyed French archive, a grainy black and white film of a man walking calmly through a bombed-out square in Warsaw as sirens blared and people screamed, the camera shaking, soldiers yelling, but the man in the center never running, never looking back, only moving forward through the smoke. And just before the reel cut out, a flash of the same symbol, the broken crown, faintly chalked on a wall behind him, appeared for a single frame. And though most of this footage was lost, the frame remained in Ulrich's safe until his death, and was passed to a journalist in Amsterdam who has since disappeared without a trace. And still the questions remain: who was he? How did he live so long? And why did he never speak his truth aloud? And some believe he was not bound by time, that the fog was not just mist but a veil between eras, and that his presence in history was not linear, but like a thread woven through the very fabric of human choice, appearing wherever power threatened to tip the world into darkness, and disappearing once balance was restored. And if that is true, if the soldier was not just a man but a guardian of memory, a keeper of correction, then perhaps he walks still among us, unnoticed in crowded streets, watching from the back of quiet rooms, riding trains without destination, leaving behind only echoes for those willing to hear them. And maybe that's why every few decades, another strange report surfaces. A nurse sees him in Syria. A prisoner in Chile hears him humming. A protester in Myanmar is handed a letter by a stranger with ancient eyes. And always, the message is the same: do not forget who you are when no one is watching. And in those moments, those brief encounters lost to time, the world is reminded that peace is not passive. It must be protected, even by those who never take credit, who never make history books, but without whom history itself might have lost its way. And so the man who shot Napoleon and vanished in the fog remains not as a hero carved in stone, but as a shadow walking beside our choices, silent, patient, and forever ready to return when the world forgets what it means to be human. Asterisk certainly. Abby Mainlick Raha Hoon, Part 5 of your story, The Soldier Who Shot Napoleon and Vanished in the Fog. Haisa Appen Kaha, or Biziata lengthy form main, Bina kissy break, Bina heading ya intro, surf ekhai ultra long paragraph ka ander deeply emotional, mystery-filled continuation of the same kahani, Jo Part 4 ka last word human say seamlessly. Continue Kardi Hai, or Ebi Kahani or Jirahodi Chali Yarahi Hai. Hai's wak ki guard main chupi hui yadan wapa zindaho rahi hun, human. A word that has been spoken for centuries, but often forgotten when blood replaces reason and ambition turns gentle minds into monsters. And perhaps that is why he walks, not to fight battles, not to stop them with strength or armies, but to remind the world what it means to feel, to remember, to carry the weight of both past and consequence. And in the decades that followed Waterloo, as steam replaced sails and electricity chased the dark from cities, his shadow remained just as present, slipping quietly across the edges of revolutions, civil wars, genocides, even moments of peace, not interfering directly but watching, always watching, Because history, as it turns out, does not march. It circles, spiraling through the same mistakes wearing different uniforms, and somewhere, deep in the margins of those repeating spirals, he remained, and though his body changed with time, his eyes, those same quiet, searching eyes, did not. And in 1993, a photo emerged from Sarajevo, taken in the middle of sniper fire, showing civilians ducking behind rubble. But in the far left, partially hidden by smoke, there stood a man upright, coat long, face blurred, walking calmly down the street with no visible fear, and though no one could confirm his identity, the photo was analyzed by AI years later, and the system flagged a facial match with a painted portrait from 1820 found in the archives of the French Interior Ministry, a man unnamed but listed under intrusion at the Office of Colonial Records. Suspect fled before questioning. And beneath the portrait, written in a hand unlike any bureaucrat's, were the words, "He knew what we had not yet done," which confused even the most seasoned analysts. And still the trail continued, never in headlines, never officially documented, but in personal letters, field reports buried beneath war files, in poetry written by dying soldiers who claimed a stranger visited them in dreams and told them their name would be remembered not for the wars they fought but for the mercy they showed. And perhaps most curiously of all was a coded journal unearthed in 2007. During the reconstruction of a collapsed monastery in the Pyrenees, minus 273 pages of cryptic notes, dates, maps, all written in 7 languages, and one entry near the center, circled in red, simply read, June 18th, 1815, shot fired. Future altered. No further interference authorized for 113 years. Monitor patterns. Fog will return. And though many called it the ravings of a madman, one linguist confirmed that the handwriting style matched a manuscript found in Istanbul in 1831, credited to a wandering monk who had claimed the veil between moments is thinnest where blood remembers. And again the same symbol, the broken crown, half eclipsed by a rising sun, appeared on its final page. And those tracking the mystery began to speculate that the fog he vanished into was not natural at all, that it was somehow a doorway, a living phenomenon, a portal that opened not by machine or magic, but by the convergence of intention, memory, and trauma, as if his ability to vanish came not from escape, but from becoming one with the very wounds of the world, and if so, it explained why he always appeared during unrest, always during the unraveling of something too powerful for one heart to hold. And those skeptics continued to mock the idea of an eternal guardian, a man beyond time, believers gathered in quiet corners of the world to share notes, drawings, whispers, believing not in superstition but in echoes, echoes that don't vanish but wait to be heard again, and so his presence became a thread, pulling quietly beneath the noise of progress and politics, stitching together moments where humanity nearly lost itself and barely remembered in time. And in 2020, during the global lockdowns that silenced entire cities, surveillance footage from a rooftop in Milan showed a lone figure standing beneath the empty Duomo, unmoving for hours, face hidden beneath a brimmed hat, trench coat fluttering even though there was no wind, and just before the footage ends, he raises his hand and leaves something on the stone steps, a folded paper, which the security team later recovered, containing only one sentence. The greatest battles are not won on fields, but in the hearts of those who still choose to feel, and beneath it, the same mark drawn in faded ink, as if the hand had done it thousands of times before, and perhaps it had, because whether he was born in the age of swords or simply walks between them all, his message remains the same. That history does not need another conqueror. It needs caretakers, and as long as men build towers of ego upon the bones of others, someone will walk the fog line, rifle lowered, watching not to punish, but to pause, to remind, to redirect, and maybe he's watching now, reading this very story through someone else's eyes, feeling the world tilt again toward another dangerous hunger for power, waiting to see if we will remember before it's too late, and when the fog rises again, not on a battlefield, but in the silence after an injustice, in the stillness. Before a decision that could break a soul or save it, maybe, just maybe, a figure will step forward, no name, no speech, no legacy to protect, only the weight of a truth we almost forgot, walking calmly toward the moment that needs him most. Not to stop time, but to hold it still long enough for the world to remember what it means to choose the right thing, even when no one will ever know your name. Name, because names are for monuments. And he never wanted a monument. He wanted memory, not the kind that fades with time, but the kind that lives quietly in choices, in those invisible turning points when a person decides to forgive instead of hate, to step back instead of strike, to listen instead of shout, and perhaps that is where he lived the most, not in history, but in those micro moments, those unseen crossroads in the souls of ordinary people, and now, after centuries of being followed in secret, drawn in art, hinted at in songs, journal entries, and grainy photographs, the trail grew faint, as if even he knew it was time, and the world was watching again, shaking with unrest, borders redrawn in blood, machines talking louder than hearts. And still no one truly knew who he was, only that he had come from a place deeper than time, from a sorrow older than war, and in the year 2024, deep in the northern woods of Norway, a group of school children on a winter hike with their teacher found something strange, an old rifle standing upright in the snow, frozen there as if planted by someone who had left it for the wind to find, beside it a small bundle wrapped in leather, untouched by age or weather, and inside were pages, poems, short notes, written in many languages, all by the same hand, the same soft pressure, as if the pen knew that paper, and on one page, there were only a few lines written in careful ink. I walked where fire fell, I listened where the bombs wept. I whispered peace to tyrants, not with power but with pain, and now I return my voice to the earth. And on the final page, a small faded drawing, the broken crown, half eclipsed by the sun, and beneath it, for the first time ever, a name, not Matthew, not a code name, but a simple word written in old script, remembrance, as if that had always been who he was, not a man, not a ghost, not a legend, but the very act of remembering made alive, walking across time like breath through history's wounds. And when the children handed the pages to the museum, no one believed them at first. But when experts dated the ink and the leather and found it to be over 200 years old, and when handwriting matched letters found across 4 continents, the story finally reached the world in full, not as a theory or legend, but as a truth, that someone had walked between the cracks of time, making sure the world didn't forget its soul, and the final trace of him came just a few months later, when an astronomer reviewing satellite thermal data from the Arctic Circle noticed something strange. A single warm footprint crossing a frozen expanse where no human could have survived, leading toward a cliff overlooking an endless field of snow and cloud, and as the wind swept across that lonely place, one last shadow was seen in the data. Standing still, head bowed, coat long, rifle no longer with him, only a book in his hand, and then the fog came again, as it always had, thick and quiet, swallowing him whole. And when it lifted, the land was empty, the silence complete. But something had changed, because around the world, for reasons no scientist could explain, thousands of people on that same day woke up with the same dream. A man walking away into the mist, looking back only once, as if asking silently, "Will you remember now?" And from that day, those who had heard of him began to write again, not stories of war or power, but stories of mercy, Stories of silence. Stories of the moment before the world breaks and the hand that holds it steady just long enough for love to breathe again. And maybe that's what he was all along, not a soldier, not a mystery, but the breath between disaster and redemption, the whisper that turns bullets into prayers, and the step taken into fog not to vanish, but to give space for humanity, to find its way without needing to be led. And though no one ever knew where he came from or where he finally went, he became something far greater than a myth. He became the proof that one man, one soul, one silent act in the middle of war can ripple across centuries like light through fog and forever remind the world that no empire, no army, no ruler will ever be greater than the quiet choice of a single person who chooses to do the right thing when no one is watching.